right, good evening, good morning, and good afternoon, everyone. We wait a few minutes to give people the chance to join, and then we start in a second. Mark, will you be sharing the slides, the first ones?
Yep, I'll get those up now, actually.
Perfect.
There's about 15 people there now. Is that looking all right, Felix?
Now it is. Yes,
Okay.
perfect. All right, it's getting slowly crowded. So I would say in terms of timekeeping, let's go. So I would like to welcome you officially to today's session, Agroforestry on Grasslands, Global Perspectives and Practices. This is part of the AgriDance project. And Mark, can we go to the next slide? And this is a project, it's an alliance for the climate. It's a dialogue on climate and agriculture between New Zealand and Germany. We want to foster mutual understanding, political, scientific, and technical cooperation on the topics of agriculture and food systems. And that's why we're here today. The project is based on 4 pillars. We have the farm level greenhouse gas accounting, food loss and waste, third-party countries, engagement and livestock, and the topic of today, the soil organic carbon in agricultural soils. And the next slide, please. So in terms of timeline, what's happening today, after me, there will be Andreas Gattinger from the Justus Liebig University Gießen in Germany, followed by Sam McNally and David Whitehead from the Bioeconomy Science Institute from New Zealand. And in the end, we have Carolina Vignoles from INEA in Uruguay. After each talk, there will be about 5 minutes for technical questions. And in the end, we will have a general discussion also with bigger questions from the audience. Speaking of which, the next slide, please. For housekeeping, so all participants except the presenters and hosts are muted and the videos are off. If you have questions, please ask them at the bottom with the Q&A button. And we, the hosts, so there is me, Felix Seidel, and from the Ag Emissions Center, Mark Liefering, we will go through the questions and ask them to the presenters. As I just said, at the end of each presentation are a few minutes for some tiny questions, and the whole webinar will be recorded and uploaded to YouTube later on, and we will send you the link through the newsletter. All right, surprise me with the next slide. That's it. All right, perfect. Then I would say, without further ado, Andreas, please be welcome to share your slides. And is there anything to add, Mark?
No, I think that's all good to go now.
All right, perfect. Then, Andreas, your slides are coming up.
All right.
We
Thank
do
you.
not yet have the presenters mode.
Now?
Yeah, yes, now we have it. All right,
Yeah.
The floor is yours.
Okay. Thanks, Felix, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me to give a talk on From Forest Pastures to Modern Agroforestry Systems, a look back and into the future of agroforestry in Germany. I'd like to divide this talk in the next 15 plus minus minutes into 4 chapters. First, what is the state of agroforestry in Germany? We have, as you know, different forms. They are more or less pretty much the same as in New Zealand and also as in Uruguay and other countries of the world. We do have also quite a good organization for promoting agroforestry. It's the German Association for Agroforestry called DEFAF, and they are conducting regular monitorings of the distribution of agroforestry across all three major categories: silvo arable with livestock, just silvo arable, and silvo pastoral with livestock. And you see on the right circle down how it is composed. It's dominating silvo arable, as Germany is more an arable agricultural country, with 80% of the total agricultural land is arable, and only 20% is permanent grassland. This is why we have a larger share of silvo arable systems, and especially in the eastern part, where we do not have much livestock per hectare, there is also little livestock in agroforestry, and this is why overall arable agroforestry, to say silvo arable, is dominating. Here you see the distribution over the different provinces or states. And when it comes to the share to the total available agricultural land for agroforestry, we are not talking about percent, we are talking about per mil. Yeah. So agroforestry is a niche, but from a niche, something can grow, as you know also from other movements. And this overview gives you how agroforestry changed over the years. There is still an increase, but there's not always a steady growth, and this is why people say it's dynamic, it's growing, but not really straightforward. When it comes to silvopastoral systems, there are only pilot projects, I would say, not really going into commercial, like the project called Brother Pasture or Bruderweide, where the scientists from Thun Institute for Organic Farming are conducting mixed grazing of the male bull calves with chicken, right? Or the pasture beef or white beef project, where endangered breeds, beef breeds, are kept on extensive ranges or rangelands, and they are kept as biodiversity manager, you can say. And another important activity is the so-called Fulavi project, where a consortium of University Göttingen, Triebwerk, and Forschungsinstitut für Nutztierbiologie, FBN, they're looking how the forage quality of leaves from deciduous trees is composed. If it has potential to serve as supplements and also reduce methane from enteric fermentation. And overall, we are talking about 1,372 plus 375 hectares. So this counts up to nearly 2,000 hectares of agroforestry system area. Among that is 375 hectares of woody structures. And but there is also a range of uncertainty, so it's probably a little bit larger. That's what DEFAF reckons. And but still, when we express it in percent, it's less than 0.015% of the potentially suitable agricultural area. And there are reasons for it. I don't want to give them here in detail. We can discuss it later. But definitely a low acceptance rate, lack of awareness among the agricultural stakeholders is one big issue. But in the back in history, not that far back in history, in around 1800, 1900, agroforestry, so forest or trees and agriculture was really present in everyday farm life. And there is this classic book from Peter Rossiger from Austria, and you see these structures still in the Alps, in the Swiss Alps, in the Bavarian Alps, and in the Austrian Alps as well, where trees and pastures are just there, and there is no really divide what is pasture and what is forest. And since the Middle Age, you can say, in mid-Europe, there was a decline of these traditional agroforestry systems, and also, and it was mostly on the lowest rate at the beginning of the industrialization, and forest pastures and trees in the agricultural landscape over the decades lost its importance. And it was actually the patron of Thünen Institute who somehow invented this typical infrastructure in German and Austrian and Switzerland landscape, that along these settlements and villages, there were the orchard trees with small ruminants, and the arable plots a little bit far away, and then the forest belt was in kind of a circle around these settlements. And this kind of agricultural landscape existed until the 1970s, you can say. And you see here pictures from my own town, where I come from. And I also got some old recordings from my own town, which is close to Gießen, north of Frankfurt. And I want to show especially these the fruit trees in 1949 and 1971. In 1949, there were in this area of 700 hectare agricultural land, nearly 2,000 fruit trees. And 50 years, not 50 years, how much is it? 25 years later, just the half existed, and now we are talking about less than 25% of this fruit trees. So the importance got lost. Sorry. And when we look how did agroforestry research start, and you can name Alexander von Humboldt, or I do at least, name it as a pioneer, maybe also inventor of natural climate protection, and also the importance of trees and the importance of agroforestry. And on his trip to Venezuela in 1805, he wrote that the forest region has a triple effect through shade cooling, evaporation, and cold-inducing radiation. And when I did my studies in Aberdeen, I was influenced by a charismatic professor from England, Peter Huxley, who was a co-founder of ICRAF and a lecturer in Aberdeen in the master program of sustainable agriculture. And actually, from him, I heard the statement resilience to erratic rainfall in the mid-1990s. And for me, it was the first time to hear this combination of words: resilience, erratic, and rainfall. And yeah, 20 years later, when I was a professor at Gießen University on our research farm Gladbauerhof, I realized what he meant, because in July 2018 there was a heavy rain of more than 100 millimeters of rain per hour, and even the farm and the soils were managed organically at this time for more than 30 years. This was not enough. This was far not enough to show any kind of resilience, as you can see on these photographs. And this was the birth date, so to say, of our agroforestry research platform at Gladbauerhof farm. And we started a few years later in February 2020 with one site on arable land, and the second site on a pasture. The pasture was established simultaneously as with the trees, and on a third site we established a key line silver arable system, and this also initiated agroecosystem research. And as you can see here, my group, and together with other researchers at JLU, we are managing quite big agroforestry project by now in Germany, and they are embedded in the concept of ecological functional intensification and circularity in the soil, plant, animal system, and as you can see here on these slides. And I'd like to show you latest data from my two workers, Eva Maria and Philip. Eva, she is a soil microbiologist, and she's conducting a meta-analysis of soil microbial community in agroforestry systems on a global level and across the three effect sizes: abundance, activity, and diversity. You can see that agroforestry leads to enhanced microbial status, and across all analyzed data sets, and these data sets derived from 113 different peer-reviewed papers. And what I just want to highlight is, if we just look at abundance and compare the effect of trees in SA, this means silver arable, and SAG means silver arable with livestock, and SP means silver pastoral, then we see trees on arable land and trees on arable land with livestock seem to enhance microbial soil life, and more than trees do on silver pastoral systems, because here it is non-significant, whereas here it makes a difference. And I think you can find an argumentation for it, a reason, because permanent, and they are mostly already quite enhanced with soil life, and so the effect with the trees is not as pronounced. And finally, agroforestry as a natural climate protection in agriculture, food, and bioeconomy. And I'd like to introduce climate protection from the German government, in which I am also a member. And we wrote a report, or somehow an expertise for developing the funding scheme of natural climate protection, which has an overall volume of nearly 4 billion euros. And when it comes to mineral soils, we see that also other soil management measures do have an effect, but they on carbon sequestration, but not always leakage or permanence is really taking care. And when we look at agroforestry, the permanence should be guaranteed because you don't remove the trees the other year. And nowadays in Germany, the land with the trees can still keep the status of agricultural land even after 20 years with the trees. So the permanence situation is solved, and there is only there's no leakage because the carbon comes from the trees and not brought in from elsewhere. And when we we calculate with an average carbon sequestration rate of 0.4 tons CO2 equivalents per hectare and year, and when we also include the woody biomass in average, then it counts up to 1.5 tons of CO2 equivalent. It's not the highest one of the measures listed here, but the fact that it is not just based on soil carbon, but also on woody products, which can be permanent in buildings or other structures, then it has a high permanence and a high impact. And when we upscale agroforestry from 0.15 to 10% hectare of agricultural land, then we have a yearly carbon sequestration rate of 2.5 million tons of CO2, and 10% of agroforestry on agricultural land is exactly the average percentage of organic farming we do have in Germany. So it's feasible, but when it takes the time organic agriculture took, then it takes up, it will take another 30 or 40 years. Right, and so we have to think about scaling agroforestry, and this is my nearly last slide. Now that the German government took over our recommendations from the scientific board, and a new funding guideline is in the planning to be established within the action program of natural climate protection. And at GLU Gießen, we actually had a Nobel Prize winner. This was Wangari Maathai from Kenya. She did her part of her PhD and also part of her studies there. And she was the founder of the Green Belt movement in Kenya and was initiator of the planting of over 50 million trees. So let's take the movement, and also let's take the movement of Nobel Prize, because this is just taking place, but on other topics. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Andreas. All right, to the audience, now is the time that you can type some questions. And Andreas, there is already one for you. Have you considered reducing N2O emissions from agroforestry?
Yeah, when I go back to this overall table, it is accounted for, yeah, in this value, but not all studies are really looking at the same time on it, but it is also accounted for. And but I have to say, for temperate regions in average, especially for mid-Europe, the database is is still weak. So this is a conservative, but still a rough estimate, which comes from different sources, which I listed here. And this is also the value Christian Böhm and the German Federation of Agroforestry works with. And in current research projects, nitrous oxide is actually measured. So we might get values directly from German agroforestry sites. In addition, so we will see how it will end up in the next years.
Thank you very much. Then, looking at the time, I would say we move on. If you could stop sharing, and then Sam and David, you will continue. And if I understand correctly, Sam, you will be kicking it off. So the floor is yours. And again, to the audience, if you have further questions, just type it in the Q&A.
Thanks, Felix.
All right.
I think David's kicking it off, so I'll leave it to David.
Perfect.
You're from Lincoln, New Zealand, where there is a growing interest in establishing trees into grasslands. Interestingly, some quite similar sort of aspects from what Andreas has just told about in Germany is happening in New Zealand as well. So next slide, please, Sam. Sam, next slide, please. Thank you. In terms of the history of agroforestry in New Zealand, it is rather a sad story. And this is probably why it's not a mainstream activity at the moment. But in the 60s and 70s, there was growing interest, and there were lots of trials which were started in our hill country, where there is the most opportunity. But it mainly for erosion control. That was the issue at the time. And then in the 1970s and 80s, there was a major push towards growing exotic pine trees on hill country, which was previously in sheep grazing country, for the purposes really of arguably growing high quality pine wood. You can see those trees on the right have been pruned up to 10 or 15 meters so that there are no knots in the wood. It's clear wood, it's highly valuable timber, and there was grazing occurring at the same time. However, within the next decade, the whole thing was a failure, largely because the trees grew very rapidly with the high nitrogen conditions. They were very, very large branches produced, and in the high winds, those branches blew off and the trees broke apart. And secondly, the quality of the pasture underneath was decreased, and so farmers were unhappy about that. So that whole big experiment ended up in a bit of a disaster, and as such, there's the interest in agroforestry never really took off. However, there is now renewed interest. And of course, what brought that interest really was the carbon market opportunity, the idea of more resilient systems. But the focus has been not on mainstream agroforestry, but on riparian zones, shelter for animals, erosion control. And recently, our Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment argued that there is a need in New Zealand for next generation forestry systems, of which agroforestry could be one of those. The next slide, please. We were particularly interested in the impacts of establishing trees on soil carbon stocks, particularly over our 11 million hectares of hill country grassland across the country. Now, at the moment, in our greenhouse gas inventory, the figures show that there is 14% lower carbon under established forests compared with that in grasslands. And that is the number used for our international reporting. So we've been investigating to try and verify this number, and are there management options which could change this number. Why is that number there? Well, this is just a summary of what we know about soil carbon in agroforestry in New Zealand, we don't know very much essentially. But earlier work from Mikko Kushbaum showed that the soil carbon stocks were 10% below grassland in plantation forests. And then there was a study by Hewitt down to 0.3 meters of a depth, showing that stocks were lower under plantation forest, but only at the 0 to 0.2 meter depths. The well-known study by Douglas, and that was with poplar and ulmus agroforestry down to 1 meter depth, showed that stocks were lower under trees, but there was a trend where there was high dependence on tree species and site. So it was not particularly clear, and it was very, very dependent on site and species. Another study by Fonseca with macrocarpa and pine in shelter belts showed that stock increased by up to 75%, 10 meters with the distance from the shelter belt. And they argued it was because of enhanced night and nutrient cycling, nutrient availability. And just to give one example from Australia, in Queensland eucalyptus forest down to a depth of 0.5 meter, they found no significant difference in carbon stocks between grasslands and forest, although there was a slight increase in stock with tree age. So you can see from those results that it's very unclear what's happening. There's need for more research. Next slide, please, Sam. What we can say about New Zealand is the importance of trees in the landscape, not necessarily agroforestry, but patches or groups of trees across the landscape. And our colleague Dan Richards did a high-resolution spatial mapping exercise and showed that trees less than 1 hectare, groups of trees less than 1 hectare, they're not eligible for our national emissions trading scheme. You can't claim carbon credits on our national scheme. But there's over 1.6 million of these tree patches with a large carbon stock in terms between 11 and 32 million tons of carbon, and a sequestration rate which is equivalent to offsetting between 2.7 and 8.5 of our national greenhouse gas emissions. So they are clearly contributing to mitigating our emissions in the biomass above ground. That, incidentally, sequestration rate is equivalent to a large amount of between $40 and $100 million annually if we were to take carbon at $60 per ton. So that's one critical importance. The next one slide, please, Sam, shows that the benefit of trees in our landscapes for shelter and shade on cattle. This analysis, again done by our colleague Dan Richards, is a modeling exercise showing what is the effect of the current distribution of trees on milk and meat production. And then he took those RCP, those climate change scenarios going into the future, and said, if we take the current distribution of trees, what will the impact of shade be in relation to those climate scenarios? The maps show where there's going to be a low effect, the yellow line, the yellow color, and a high effect, the blue color. There's big impacts down the east coast of both islands and in the center of part of the southern areas of the South Island. But what he showed, that the current tree cover will support an additional 500 million liters of milk and 8,000 tons of beef, which is equivalent to $400 million annually for our exports. So clearly, trees have a big impact. Next slide, please. So returning to the soil and the benefit of the trees, we've been particularly focusing on the edge effects of groups of trees, looking at are tree sizes greater around the edges of the clusters, and is there enhanced microbial activity leading to greater soil carbon stocks associated with that edge effect? So we've been sampling soil carbon down to depth of 0.6 of a meter along transects, 27 meters into tree clusters, and 27 at the edge, and then 27 meters out into the grassland. So we're focusing on edge effects. Next slide, please, Sam. And we're arguing there are complementarity effects. This is what we're investigating between particularly around the edges of the trees. The diagram on the left shows a diagram of trees going out into the grasslands on either side. And these complementarity effects we are assigning into 7 different possible ways where the benefits could be. There are clearly effects of reduced competition, more light available, more nutrients available at the edges compared within the patches of trees. Secondly, that there are effects on grassland productivity, of course, being greater outside and being much lower inside trees. But what is happening at the edge? Well, combined with those litter inputs and that carbon inputs to the system, we move down to 3, which is essentially litter inputs, exudates, rooting different rooting depths, mycorrhizal functions and microbial functions, which are resulting in impacts on soil carbon stocks. So we're investigating those, arguing that there are beneficial effects as a result of the presence of trees, particularly around the edges. We mustn't, of course, we must always consider the impacts of grazing animals, number 4 on the diagram there, which are adding nutrients, particularly around the edges of these tree clusters. Number 5, there are certainly impacts in topsoil and subsoil. We need to look at both of those in order to examine the processes going on. Number 6, we recognize better climate conditions, the impacts of different climate, but also soil type. And finally, number 7 is all of those are combining to impact soil carbon stocks and the fractions, the ratio of the MAOM to the POM, the formation and decomposition of the organic matter, and we're looking at the vulnerability of those impacts. So I'll pass over to Sam to continue to show you some data.
All right, thanks, David. As David was talking about, a large piece of this research work has been focused on soil carbon. And in the kind of development of this work, we came up with this hypothesis that you could use the soil properties and sort of use the targeted use of trees to increase soil carbon that way. So in doing this hypothesis, we developed this quadrant, as you can see here. On the y-axis, we've got potential soil carbon stock. And this is really driven by inherent soil properties. And in New Zealand, one of the key drivers of soil carbon stock in New Zealand is surface area. So if you think of the potential soil carbon stock being kind of the size of the bucket, or the amount of the bucket being the amount of carbon that a soil could hold, soils with a high mineral surface area will have a larger bucket than those with low mineral surface area. On the x-axis, we have soil carbon deficit, and this is, if you envisage this as the amount of carbon that's in a bucket, and the remaining amount would be the deficit. So the bit that's not filled would be the deficit. When we talk about this deficit, we really are talking about the mineral associated carbon, which David kind of just mentioned just before. But combining both this potential stock and the current deficit, we kind of developed these 4 sort of regions. And with that, we kind of thought maybe we could use trees to help increase or realize some more of that potential. So for an example here, if you have low mineral surface area and a low potential and a low deficit given by the blue box, these are sort of quite poor soils. They have a low capacity to further increase soil carbon in that mineral fraction. So we'd really want to use trees that have kind of recalcitrant litter to build particulate organic matter and to increase our stock further. The other extreme of that is that green box there, which would have higher mineral surface area, so high potential, and also they have a higher deficit. So those are really good soils, and they have a good ability to protect further soil carbon. And so these we thought you could use targeted use of trees to fill that deficit. And these would be ones that either could increase roots or the rooting depth, and also that decomposable litter. So given that to associate carbon with our mineral fraction, a large amount of that goes through a microbial process. And so you really need things that are decomposable or that microbes can use and turn over really well. So that was kind of our thinking there. And so this kind of hypothesis here built a large amount of how we wanted to go out and sample across New Zealand. And so to do that, we went to a large number of sites across New Zealand. And here we've got some photos of some of the sites we've been to. We went to sites that had trees already established that had been planted at least 10 years prior. and they had to be sites where trees have been planted into grassland. So we excluded any remnant native bush that we have in New Zealand. And so these were trees that had been targeted, or trees have been integrated into grassland in some time ago. And so we went across to a number of those. And this figure here shows kind of the distribution of the sites that we've been to across New Zealand. So the red dots are our sampling locations. So we've tried to get to a wide range of soils across New Zealand. We couldn't get to everywhere with the constraints that we had, but we have got a relatively large range. And currently we've got about 58 grazed sites that have planted trees we have sampled. And we've really, in doing this, we've actually captured the most dominant soil orders across New Zealand. So by doing this, we think we've got a pretty representative take on the effect of trees going into these grasslands. Going back to what I mentioned before about that potential stock in the surface areas, allophonic soils are kind of the ones that have these really high surface areas and really high carbon stocks. And then as you go down those different soil orders, we have a range of those different surface areas within there. So we've kind of really have tried to capture that quadrant there with our hypothesis. We've also got quite a range of forest types within our sampling across those different sites. These vegetation types range from our exotic conifers or Pinus radiata through to different broadleaf native legumes, so nitrogen fixing plants, and also mixed, where you've got a range of those species all mixed together. So what we've found so far for the soil carbon stocks is that we've found that we actually do get about a 10 tons of carbon per hectare increase under the trees relative to the grass and in our low potential soils. So these are the soils that had the low surface area I mentioned before. And we also found no difference on high potential soils. So there was no difference in carbon stock across that gradient between grass and forest. So we really can see that planting trees can help to increase soil carbon stocks in some of our marginal soils. And this figure here shows the kind of result of that. So on the y-axis, we've got carbon stock, and on the x-axis, we've got 3 points, so the grass, the edge, and the forest, for both our high potential on the left-hand side and the low potential on the right-hand side. The two different circles, so there's an open field circle, which is a depth-based measurement, and the closed circle is the equivalent soil mass. It was quite important to express these results on an equivalent soil mass basis, because when we go out and take a core, you go down to a certain depth, and that would be your fixed depth. But if you have any bulk density differences, which you often do get between grazed and forest systems, you have to account for that and make sure you're sampling the same mass of soil. And that's what we do with the equivalent soil mass calculation with those black circles. But regardless of which, whether we use depth-based or fixed or equivalent soil mass, we do see the same results. And so in our high potential soils, there was quite a large amount of variability in the samples given the different soils we've sampled, but there is no difference across that gradient. Whereas in the low potential ones, you can see as you go from the grass to the edge of the forest, we increase carbon by about that 10 tons a hectare. The no difference in high potential soil is an important finding as well, because David alluded to the fact that our previous work or previous assumptions in our inventory assume that when you plant trees into grass or when you have forest, you have lower carbon, and this is kind of countering that. And so there's definitely room to explore that further. But the overall thing that we're finding is that planting trees or establishing trees into grassland isn't resulting in loss of carbon, which is a good thing, because you obviously get above ground carbon that you gain as well. In addition to this, going to all these sites across New Zealand, we've got some long-term measurement sites where we're doing a whole lot of detailed measurements, such as looking at climate along in the forest, on the edge, and in the grassland. We're also looking at soil temperature and moisture. We're doing a whole lot of microbial measurements across this gradient. We're doing lithophore, we're doing fractions, we're doing a whole range of root turnover. So a whole range of more detailed measurements that we couldn't do in that field sampling as we're across all those sites. One of these sites here is pictured here. We've got a site near where we're based in Lincoln, or near Christchurch. And this shows we've got 4 different vegetation types that we can actually target on the same soil. We've got 4 additional long-term measurement sites to this one. So we're really trying to look at the underlying mechanisms that could be driving these changes in soil carbon. One of the things I didn't mention in the slide before is that we're also looking at the fractions or the distribution of that carbon. So we want to understand where that increase in carbon might be occurring, and whether it's increasing the particular organic carbon or the mineral associated carbon. So there's a lot of additional work going on behind the scenes that's kind of in progress that we don't have the data for yet. Just to summarize what we've kind of talked about so far, that integrating trees into grassland for New Zealand, we are seeing that this is a way to increase our carbon stock, both above and below ground. The important thing that we're finding is we're not seeing a loss of soil carbon associated with tree establishment. And I think this is a really important finding, because if there was a loss of soil carbon, you kind of have to take that into account with the above ground biomass you might be gaining. So this is a positive story, and also challenges our previous assumptions that we could maybe improve our inventory. Carbon gains can occur at depth or below kind of the current IPC recommendation of going to 30 centimeter depth only. So I think we need to make sure we need to measure or quantify carbon stocks below that depth, and at least greater than 60 centimeters would be ideal. And I guess there's the increase in carbon stock is really going to be dependent on tree species, how you arrange them, water and nutrient availabilities, all those sort of things. So there's a whole lot of things to think about. But we also see there's multiple additional co-benefits we get from having these trees in our landscapes. And I think these are really important to consider, not just from when you're planting the trees for a carbon perspective, but also think about how we can arrange these trees in the landscape to get the maximum benefit for all these co-benefits. And we've got a large amount of ongoing work currently underway that's looking at the effect of microbial function in the soil with these trees, how we can scale or model these stock changes under different scenarios, and also trying to quantify these co-benefits more, and look at barriers to adoption. So what's preventing farmers from planting trees within the grassland to make this a success? And I guess what we're really trying to get to is a way to inform or optimize our landscape design. So how we might arrange these trees in the landscape or within our grassland systems to have the maximum benefit, not just from carbon, but from all these other co-benefits as well. And so this is just if you want more detail, this work, the large program we've got is called the Trees and Landscape Program, and it's going until 2027. So we're kind of just over halfway through. And if you want to have more detail on that, then feel free to get in touch with David or myself. I also just want to highlight that this is a large piece of work with lots of collaborators, not just in New Zealand, but also internationally as well. And so it is kind of an exciting kind of program, and it has formed the basis of a lot of our kind of understanding and kind of thinking behind it. And one thing that's kind of come out of it is that we've got this ongoing collaboration with our other BSI colleagues within New Zealand to try and develop some on-farm proof of concept systems, and also understanding and really trying to target that climate resilient agroforestry. So I'll just leave it at that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sam and David. Thank you for this very good talk. We got also some questions, which I would leave up for the discussion part for timekeeping. And I would say we directly move on to Carolina, and after that, get into the discussion. Sam and David, in case you want to answer some of these, you can. Otherwise, we do it in the discussion part. All right. Then Carolina, the floor is yours, and you will be spotlighted very soon. There we go. Perfect. All right.
Thank you very much, Felix. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening for everyone. Thank you very much for inviting us to present this talk, Silvopastoral System for Sustainable Livestock Farming. So we all know that we have a big challenge for creating sustainable production, and livestock farming is facing these sustainability challenges because sustainability is not anymore an option, but it is a duty that we all have, a necessity for the long-term viability of the agricultural sector. In our region, natural grassland is a biodiverse ecosystem that is also the basis of livestock production, particularly the cow-calf system, beef production system. And of course, these systems are exposed to extreme weather events that affect plant and animal productivity. So in this context, silvopastoral systems offer an alternative to reconcile production with conservation. Silvopastoral systems are defined as deliberate long-term integration of trees, livestock, and pastures, which interact harmoniously, promoting synergies among their components with the goal of maximizing the system production in a sustainable manner. And here, I like to talk about deliberate, which is a design that we previously defined and plant in a piece of land. The long-term integration refers to a 15 years time where we have the trees growing, with the pasture growing, and also the livestock grazing in this area. So we need to make sure that the synergy occurs during the 15 years period to maximize the production. So as the tree don't kill the grass, but also the cattle don't kill the trees. In this map of the silvopastoral systems in Uruguay, we can see clearly 3 regions. In 2021, we had 6,400 hectares of silvopastoral systems with different species of eucalyptus, particularly eucalyptus for cellulose production in the south and eucalyptus for clear wood production in the north, which is Eucalyptus grandis. At that time, we had 39 cases of silvopastoral systems, but they were very diverse because the production of this eucalyptus is very different. And so it was not really standardized, the silvopastoral systems. So when the society, the Uruguayan Society of Silvopastoralism was created, we worked about 1 year, 1.5 years on a document to clearly define the parameters of a silvopastoral system. And we come out with this document saying that it has a minimum of 400 trees when the purpose is shade or unshelter, to a maximum of 300 trees when it's in a diverse multi-purpose system. The design must include forest-free alleys of greater or equal than 18 meters, a number of continuous rows of less or equal than 3, a distance between rows that greater or equal than 4 meters, and distance between trees of greater or equal than 3 meters. Also, pruning and thinning must be carried out so that at 10 years of age, there are no more than 200 trees per hectare. And also, silvopastoral systems must not occupy more than 50% of the original effective grazing area of the livestock property. This document has been received by the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries, and it is now in the process of being a ministerial directive to clearly define a silvopastoral system from any other type of forestry production. Due to this definition, also the Bank of the Republic of Uruguay created a loan to assist silvopastoral production, and this was recently presented in September in our biggest sheep show in Montevideo, Uruguay, with the presence of our Minister of Agriculture. So it is a loan that is financing for up to 15 years, an amount of $600,000 with a 3 years grace period of interest and a 4 years grace period for the principal loan. This was something that the farmers that belong to the Uruguayan Society of Silvopastoralism wanted the government to develop, to help them financing these systems. So when we started working in this area, there was very little knowledge on silvopastoral systems in Uruguay, and we started generating knowledge in different farms, particularly in the northeast of Uruguay. And we created a long-term platform in Cerro Largo, which is the state where I live. And in this platform, we planted We planted Eucalyptus grandis in 2020 in soils that are of forestry privilege of aptitude, and we have 30 hectares in this platform. The genetics of the trees were from the National Research Institute for Agriculture, and all of the rows were planted with a north-south orientation. So we have the sunlight in the alleys during most of the day to promote grass growth. And also we had a design with 3 treatments and 3 repetitions, 3 blocks. So the treatments were natural grasslands with no trees, and all of them have natural grasslands. In another treatment, double rows with 5 meters between plants in the row, 5 meters between rows, plus 60 meters of alley, giving 160 trees per hectare, and quadruple rows with the same design, giving 240 trees per hectare. In this platform, we are trying to maintain the synergies between the forest shift. So it is a 15-year shift, and so far we are now in the 5th year after planting, and we are trying to. We know that these systems are very dynamic and complex because we have the trees growing year by year, and also we prune the trees to promote the sunshine going into between the trees and promote grass growth. And also these trees are growing, and they are growing fat because they have plenty of space, and we want to have this clear wood, which is a product that is very good for, it's obtaining a very good price in the market. So the farmers can diversify the income of the farm. And also, we want to generate knowledge for science-informed policies in this long-term research platform from planting to harvest. So what we are investigating here, we know that the shade promotes less variation in air temperature and humidity. This has a positive effect on certain forest species that grow under the shade, but also there is a decrease in forest production in those species that do not grow under shade effect. Also, we have less solar radiation in the understory, but it has a positive effect on forest quality. And all of these have a positive effect on animal welfare and production. We also know that there is less humidity in the soil, less temperature variation, but greater organic matter and nutrient recycling. So we are also looking at the biodiversity of these ecosystems, looking at spiders and frogs, organic matter, roots, nutrients, and carbon stock. We are looking at botanic composition and productivity of natural grasslands, productivity and grazing behavior of cattle, environmental indicators looking at diversity of spiders and frogs. We are looking at carbon stock in the soils, tree growth, and also evaluating microclimate change. So we want to add social aspects, economic results, and optimization models to know which combination is the best for the farmer, for the income, and also for the environment. We have published information from this platform. We started analyzing the opportunities and challenges for silvopastoral systems in Uruguay. We created this platform. We are interacting with the farmers within the Society of Silvopastoralism to let them know all the good advantages that these silvopastoral systems have. But also with a clear idea that if our hypothesis is not correct, if there are some synergies that are not positive, we are going to let them know what are the trade-offs of these systems. So we are also teaching undergraduate and postgraduate students. We have a new career that is called Technologist in Integrated Agricultural Production Systems that started in the year 2024 here in Cerro Largo, Melo. We are also teaching postgraduate students from the veterinary faculty and the agronomy faculty. Also, we are doing extension, innovation, and development with the Society of Silvopastoralism. We are organizing activities together, developing different plantation models, methods, seminars, workshops, visiting sites and demonstrations. And because we are convinced that the farmers, they can learn and they can use their own machinery to do this plantation, and they be the owners of the trees, and it's not that complicated, all the methodology to have a success in this type of plantations. And they have the benefit of the wood, the clear wood, and the benefit for the animals. So we started working in this topic in 2016, that we created this working team. Since 2017, we are organizing every 2 years seminars that are nowadays a good site for exchanging information between technicals and academics and students and everyone that is interested in these systems. The society, the Uruguayan Society of Silvopastoralism, was created in 2021. We are working together. We are part of the society, and this society is organizing activities every year, particularly around November, when is the date it was created, the anniversary of the society. And then we started with the society organizing the rest of the seminars. Also, since the Uruguayan Society was created, we doubled the amount of hectares that are planted with silvopastoral systems, with the definitions that we created and I talked about before. And so we recently had the 5th seminar that was really a success here in Milan. This, of course, is a joint work between academia, producers, and government. We have a lot of technicians, producers, people working at the farms, students, a lot of different societies and faculties and institutes working together. And I'd like to finish my presentation with this video. Peter Guamaro is the owner of the land where we have the long-term platform, and I would like to show you what he thinks about this system. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Carolina. All right. Then a reminder, if you have questions, please put it in the Q&A. And now we are also in the part of the seminar where we will tackle those questions that we did not answer yet and maybe get a little bit into discussion. I have a first question from David Emde to Sam and David. Has agroforestry in New Zealand been attempted using resilient native tree species rather than fast-growing pine?
Yes, there are isolated examples where people are using high quality native species which produce high quality timber. One of our species is called totara. There are examples across the country where people are doing this, but they are very isolated.
All right, thank you very much. I would stick with the two of you. There's one more question for you. Currently, most regulatory and carbon protocol frameworks often list agroforestry under ARR, so afforestation, reforestation, and revegetation, for crediting simplicity. While I feel the ecological, social, and scientific consensus is shifting, should agroforestry be included as a pillar of regenerative agriculture, both in carbon methodologies, where it says in brackets, both more permanent carbon and non-reversible NO2 reduction, and as a best practice approach for ecosystem resilience and climate mitigation?
It's a bit complicated question. Yes, I mean, I think, yes, I would agree with that philosophy. However, it will be a long time before we do enough work to persuade policymakers to make those changes. What I think is really critically important is highlighting the impacts in terms of inventory and highlighting the impacts in terms of the benefit. And if we can do that, then we can talk to policymakers on changing the rules, as it were, to give carbon credits. Every farmer we talk to is looking for incentives. And if we can offer incentives to promote the practices, then they will be adopted. But at the moment, adoption is not something which is easily done.
Maybe Carolina and Andreas, would you like to add to that too? Because basically that is a question for any country, if you want to add.
You go first,
I
Andreas?
could, yep. Go ahead, please.
Okay, here in Uruguay is almost the same situation. Now we had a movement there from the forest industry. I am talking about very dense industry that make agreements with the stake with the slaughterhouses, so they could sell this meat, zero carbon meat. But at the end of the day, they were not very successful. I think that it was maybe they were able to sell 1 or 2 containers, but then it was they decided that this I don't know how to this carbon-free meat was not real. Because also this type of production is short-term, 10 years, and then is converted into cellulose. So when it's harvested, everything goes back to the atmosphere. So it was not a real carbon-free bonus, or how you call it. But now with the silvopastoral systems, the current president of the Society of Silvopastoralism has been working for 4 years with a guy that is working, is trying to certify this bonus of carbon from silvopastoral systems, measuring almost everything, pasture, carbon stock, the number of trees, and looking at the benefits in the cattle. And this has been accepted recently. So there are 3 or 4 farmers that are included in this carbon stock selling bonus. And I mean, so this is different. The silvopastoral systems are really designed, and they are created to really preserve pasture, the soil, the activity of bacteria under the soil, and because the carbon is stocked for a long time in this clear wood, because it's exported and it stays in the different constructions. This is going to be real. So it is now accepted after 4 years, and so this is going to be something different that the farmers can count, and they can do it only once in the life of the trees, of course. So it is very serious, with a very good analysis, and all the I mean, they have been checking that everything is correct, is real, and it is going to be a good output for the silvopastoral farmers. And I would like to make a comment on the native species. Here in Uruguay, we have some examples also with native species. The problem is that they are not easy to be processed by the industry, because they are not straight, and they have a lot of problems. Also, all the machinery in the industry is prepared for the eucalyptus, because it's very, it is set for that. So there are several problems. Many people trying to work in this topic, but it's going to take many years to make silvopastoral systems with native species massively. Sorry for my English, I haven't been using it for a long time.
No, you're fine. And Andreas, you wanted to add?
Yeah, in Germany, we have the program of, I mentioned it, the Action Program for Natural Climate Protection. That means that agricultural practices might get funding if they also contribute to biodiversity and to natural reservation or conservation aspects. And so agroforestry is definitely part of it, but regenerative agriculture as such is not, at least on the European level, and also not a German level, not really defined. In contrast to organic agriculture, you still can use chemicals, agrochemicals. So a certification scheme would be somehow not easy just to say it qualifies for regenerative agriculture, because regenerative agriculture as such is not legally defined in any kind of scheme. Yeah.
There I was muted. Thank you, Andreas. I would stick with you for a moment. There's an additional question to you. Do you have data on the effect of trees on crop production when integrated into arable systems?
Yeah, this is the most important questions coming from the practice, from the farmers, if you want them, or if they engage with planting trees on arable land. And as in Germany, there is not much longer agroforestry sites to look at these effects. There was a recent study published from Hohenheim, and they showed stable yields for arable with coppice and with different fruit trees, nut trees, they showed that it has an effect, but rather moderating the yields, not really reducing or increasing the yields. But the global data shows a little bit different story, because trees are often planted because of better microclimate conditions. And when you plant trees, especially for this, you can increase the yields, especially for C3 plants, right? And not always for maize plants like sorghum or maize, because these plants like the full sun or not cooling that much. So it depends on which plant, and it definitely also depends on the age of the trees. But the overall land equivalent ratio for the arable crops is better with trees.
Thank you very much,
This is
Andreas.
also, sorry, just want to add, this is also a meta study in progress. It has only been shown at a conference, but the manuscript is not submitted.
All right. Thank you. And to keep David and Sam on their toes, I give you a question. In fact, two questions. How do different tree species impact soil carbon sequestration in grasslands? And are there any species that are more effective? And the second one, are there any potential trade-offs or negative impacts on soil health or local ecosystems when trees are introduced in, not grasslands? Maybe not in grasslands, unsure. Let's stick to the first question, maybe.
I can start if you want, David. I guess that's the question we're trying to understand, that we had that hypothesis that you could use trees to, or targeted use of trees or the different species to increase soil carbon, and we've gone and sampled a wide range of different tree species. We're kind of in the early stages of looking at that with the fractions and the distribution of how that changes. But we also plan to use modeling to run scenarios to look at this as well. So I think at a very simplistic level, the different tree species will have different properties, such as like carbon and nitrogen ratios of the litter and that sort of thing, and that will influence how that's processed in the soil and how the microbes respond and how that is then incorporated into the soil carbon. So I think there will be some differences between tree species. I think whether we can recommend which species is best is still to be looked into and explored. So yeah, that's just I don't know if that's answered the question very well, but I think there will be some differences in properties that the tree gives that will process differently in soil, and we just have to understand that better.
David, you want to add?
No, that's a very sensible response from Sam. Yeah.
Also, now my not native English speaker brain transformed the question correctly. The second one, are there any potential trade-offs or negative impacts on soil health or local ecosystems when trees are introduced into grasslands?
Well, we really don't know that answer yet. I mean, we are doing a lot of microbial work. We are anticipating being able to model impacts, but we're just not that far along to be able to look at those other aspects at the moment.
I could just add to that, we have been to one farm where they have got a problem with a certain species that's been established along waterways about reducing water. So there has been some kind of research done a long time ago about how trees, and this species I'm talking about is willow. So when willows establish on along the edge of these rivers and stuff, that's actually reducing the flow downstream because they're using a lot of water. So there are potential impacts that will be or potential negative impacts about introducing these trees. So we just have to understand them further as well. So.
Carolina, you want to add to this?
Yes, regarding the first question, Here in Uruguay, we have native species that are legumes. So in this respect, because they fix nitrogen to the soil and they are a very good option, but it's going to take, as I said before, a very long time to have them, to develop them, and they grow very slowly also. So there are a lot of problems with native species that may be very good for this type of systems. And regarding the other question, in this system, in this platform that I described before, we have, as I said, 160 and 240 trees per hectare. And in these 4 years after plantation, we haven't seen any negative changes in diversity of grass species, or growth of dry matter, or any negative species, negative effects, sorry, in frogs or ants or spiders. So far, it is they are very young trees. We have been pruning. There is only 14% interference of the radiation. So they are very mild, the density and everything. And also, when we planted these trees, we only make we only disturb in the site of plantation. So we only introduce the tractor with the chisel in the point of plantation, and also the herbicide in the site of plantation. So the disruption to the environment was the minimum possible. And in these conditions, after 4 years, we are not able to see any negative changes.
Thank you very much. Now I have a question going to whoever of you would like to answer. Do you think current impact assessment methods capture the full value of agroforestry systems, or do we need new indicators, for example, multifunctionality or resilience? Who wants to tackle this?
Well, maybe
I could start, maybe. Okay.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. It's and it's also important, especially in the context of climate resilience or climate change. And agriculture, it's not just mitigation, it's also adaptation, it's also stopping the species decline, and social and economics aspects. So we are in any kind of farming system, if we want to do a holistic assessment, we have to deal with more than just one indicator. But then the question is, what is the weighing where we put more emphasis on? And you can do, as a researcher, whatever you want if you have good arguments, but at the end it's also a kind of political or societal decision. If we want to have trees in the landscape, right, because it looks more natural or somehow cozy, instead of or natural trees instead of somehow of productive trees for the timber industry or for cellulose. If we really need new methodologies, I'm not sure. I think it always addresses this complexity if we look at the full picture of agricultural systems or agricultural and food transformation anyhow.
Could I add to that, Felix?
Yes, please.
I agree entirely with what Andreas has said. However, I think we have to look in terms of there are multiple benefits associated with these systems, with any agricultural system. And we should not just be thinking about carbon. I mean, that's clearly an important reason in terms of the mitigating greenhouse gases, but also the storage of carbon in carbon stocks in the soil as well. But there's always going to be trade-offs. And I mean, we've started to look at the economic impacts and the environmental impacts, right through to the impacts on society in relation to livelihoods, where if we put plantation forest, you lock that up, you lock that land up, you can't use it for, well, for forever really, but certainly for the lifetime of the tree crops. Whereas agroforestry allows you to continue the livelihoods of those farmer people. And there are always going to be multiple benefits, but we can't have everything. So it's all a question really of optimizing what do we want from these systems. And yes, I mean, this is all now possible to do. And so there needs to be some flexibility in terms of how do we actually give a number in terms of what of those benefits are. It's very multidimensional. It has to be flexible.
All right. Thank you. So we have 4 more minutes, 8 more questions. So I will do some sieving. I would like to hear Carolina's voice again. Therefore, a question to her. It was about the video clip you showed with the farmer. So the question, to sum it up a bit, is